So I've had a lot of you guys ask me to make a video about this, and I figured it's probably worth making a video about because it's one of the biggest news stories of the wrestling world coming out of this past weekend and maybe of the whole year. So the battle lines have been drawn politically behind the scenes, and hell, you could even say physically. There is a major problem going on behind the scenes at AEW. They have called it, some have, not people in AEW, but maybe some have. They've called it the AEW Civil War between management and a group of wrestlers and other groups of wrestlers as well. So the whole thing goes back to what happened with CM Punk. Yeah, I know what happened, but before I go into my thoughts, I want to give you guys a recap of what happened and kind of explain the situation. And I also want to talk about what I would do differently and what I think they should do. So last Sunday night after AEW All Out 2022, there was a post-media scrum with Tony Khan featuring some of the talent, and the first one to go up was the AEW Heavyweight Champion CM Punk after defeating Jon Moxley in the main event of the pay-per-view and recapturing the title, featuring, of course, the return of MJF and a build-up to that future match coming up, maybe at Full Gear, maybe at a different point. So CM Punk was firing off verbal live rounds during this whole thing. He cut a promo on Colt Cabana, who he referred to as Scott Colton, his former best friend. He talked about Hangman Page being unprofessional, and he straight up took shots at the Young Bucks, who are EVPs. For those who don't know, the executive vice presidents of AEW were Cody Rhodes, who's no longer there, but he was one of the first ones, Kenny Omega, and both the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson. And CM Punk was very, very mad at what he perceived to be rumors being spread out by the EVPs. So specifically, he was talking about the Young Bucks. I don't believe he was talking about Kenny Omega, but Omega was involved in what's going to happen after, because this all led to an actual fist fight. I'm not even making that up. And I want you to take note that while CM Punk is firing off these shoot comments, the CEO and president of the company, the owner of the company, Tony Khan, is next to him, just with a very, very, he looked very, I want to say, confused, unsure of himself, awkward. He was put in a very precarious position right here. So Punk is firing off all these things about Hangman and the Young Bucks. So let me rewind to give you the context. So back in 2014, CM Punk did a podcast with Scott Colton, Colt Cabana, and they were best friends for years. If you follow wrestling, you know that these guys broke in together at the Steel Dominion. They worked indies together in the 2000s, built up to Ring of Honor, and eventually Punk would go sign with WWE and then take 7 years off. But bottom line is these guys were at one time the best of friends, and they had a falling out because what happened was at one point WWE's doctor sued CM Punk and Colt Cabana, and then they had a falling out which led to Colt Cabana suing Punk and Punk countersuing. This was back in like 2014 when all this went down, when Punk left WWE. He did this very, heartfelt and really, really aggressive podcast with Colt Cabana, rightfully so. He was very, very upset at the way he felt he'd been treated in the company. So Colt Cabana has been signed to AEW for a number of years now and was really mostly a background player, not really pushed to the top. I would say his biggest match in the company would be the match he had with Bryan Danielson last November on AEW Dynamite. That was probably his biggest TV match, and I would even say biggest match in the history of the company for him, for Colt Cabana in the history of AEW. So Punk and Cabana didn't get along. They haven't gotten along, and it is what it is. So CM Punk believes that what happened was that the Young Bucks believed that CM Punk played politics and used his stroke and used his stature as being the top guy in the company to have Colt Cabana removed from the AEW roster and put on Ring of Honor, which is a company AEW also owns. And they believe that Punk did this to play politics because he was still angry at Scott Colton, Colt Cabana. CM Punk stated in a very irritated and angry way at the post-show press scrum that he has not been friends with Cabana for a number of years, since 2014, and that he doesn't really care about him, doesn't care what he does, where he eats, where he sleeps, and that he's pissed off because, according to what he said, the EVPs, the Young Bucks, went around telling dirt sheet writers, insiders, that is, like Sean Ross Sapp and Dave Meltzer and others, that Punk was the guy that got Colt Cabana demoted to Ring of Honor. This would, of course, lead to an incident on AEW Dynamite where Hangman Page was doing a back and forth with CM Punk in the ring to build up their match at Double or Nothing, and Hangman Page sort of veered off the script. Neither one of the two guys were scripted, like actually word for word scripted, but they were told to hype up this match, and then Hangman Page kind of made some comments about how Punk, kind of weird comments that I didn't think they were that. It didn't make much sense to why he would do that. And I thought they were maybe teasing a heel turn with Punk or Hangman, but that wasn't the case. Hangman went into business for himself and kind of took shots at Punk's behind-the-scenes behavior and how he's fake behind the scenes compared to how he is in public. And a lot of folks have actually said this about Punk. Punk does have somewhat of a bad reputation in the business and is considered a rebel by many people, but not by everyone, because others view him as kind of a guy fighting for the working class. Again, that's all up to you and your perspective. There's a long history of CM Punk that you can go back and dissect and look into, but there's always two sides to every story. Don't ever forget that. There's two sides to every story. So that would lead to August, when CM Punk returned to build up his match with Jon Moxley. He comes out to the ring and he calls out Hangman Page to fight him. Hangman doesn't come out. Punk calls him a coward. Now, the reason why Hangman didn't come out is because Punk himself, once again, just like Hangman did, veered off the plan. He was supposed to go out there to build up a match with Jon Moxley, and instead he went out there basically to humiliate Hangman Page as a receipt for what Hangman Page had done to him. With the idea being, if he calls out Page, Page is not going to come out because it's not in the format for him to come out, and it'll make him look bad. I don't think that really worked, because what happened is, over the coming days after that, people started talking about how Punk went into business for himself and that it was unprofessional, and some say it was a receipt. Again, there's different opinions here, but basically there's actual behind-the-scenes heat between CM Punk and Hangman, and it was reported by several news outlets that there was legitimate heat between them. They don't like each other. One person straight up told me that Punk told Hangman, I don't know how true this is, but Punk told Hangman, I'm never going to put you over, which is exactly what Shawn Michaels said to Bret Hart back in 97, which began a huge problem behind the scenes that would eventually lead to the Montreal Screwjob. But nonetheless, the bottom line is, the reason why I'm using that comparison is because there's a lot of behind-the-scenes turmoil right now in AEW because of this, but it all came to a head during the AEW press scrum. Punk went off on these guys. He accused the Young Bucks of talking to dirt sheets and spreading around rumors that he had done this to Colt Cabana, which he had not done. He came off very angry and very bitter and upset. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is because this is a major problem, and it was also something that happened publicly. This is not like a behind-the-scenes thing you hear about. There's literally video footage of this on AEW's YouTube channel and on other YouTube channels. Punk straight up took off the freaking, he took the gloves off here and just went in. And the issue is that the guys who he's talking about, besides just Hangman Page, but the guys who he's talking about are managers, straight up executive vice presidents who were there when the company started. Like the Young Bucks or not, they are executives. They are managers of this company. And the owner of the company is sitting there pretty much just watching his top guy, his top babyface, probably the biggest star in that company along with Chris Jericho, just go in and dismantle his own management team. And that to me is really, really, really bad. It makes the company look Mickey Mouse. It makes Tony Khan look weak. It makes him look like he has no control, which is obvious based on everything we've seen. And it's a bad look to have your top guy fighting with your management. He's showing publicly that there's infighting going on, there's turmoil. And I'm not saying that Tony Khan should have just stepped up and, told Punk to shut up or anything like that, but he just sat there while Punk unprofessionally went off on the Young Bucks. Now, again, in my opinion, this was very unprofessional of CM Punk, at the same time, if the Young Bucks really did go around and tell the Sheet stuff about him, that's also unprofessional. However, I will say this. There have been reports now that the Young Bucks were not the ones that told Sean Ross Sapp and others about the CM Punk Colt Cabana thing. CM Punk clarified that he did not demote Colt Cabana. In fact, I believe the discussion was that Colt Cabana himself kind of felt uncomfortable that Punk was there, but what more can you do? I mean, what more can you do? I don't know the details of that because I don't work in that company, but either way, this was not the end of it. So after Punk cuts this crazy shoot promo, he then goes and we find out later on in the evening that there was a backstage fight between CM Punk, Ace Steel, his trainer and AEW agent, and members of the Elite. Apparently, CM Punk started swinging at the Young Bucks in the back, and then you have Kenny Omega getting involved, and then apparently Ace Steel threw a chair and hit Kenny Omega, and it became this big melee, and there were security guards there and everything. This is supposed to apparently be a shoot. Obviously, when it first happened, I thought it was a work. I thought they were building up to something, but several people have said it's not a work, it's a shoot. People who I trust, people who are trustworthy. There's a real problem going on right now in AEW, and this is the kind of stuff that you only hear stories about. This really comes off like end time WCW, when you had fights going on and guys not getting along and public bashing of the company. It doesn't make your company look good. It makes it look very Mickey Mouse, and it makes it seem like Khan has no control over these guys. And whether you like Vince McMahon or not, this type of stuff almost never happened in WWE, especially not, especially since the Montreal Screwjob and the Sean Brett stuff. But, I mean, there are incidents where there have been issues. Like, for example, Lesnar had an issue at one time with Chris Jericho after a SummerSlam. These things have happened. But this was on a public forum that CM Punk just straight up buried AEW EVPs. So where do we go from here? I personally feel like I understand why CM Punk was mad, because being somebody who's on the internet, I hate when bullshit about me gets spread. There have been so many lies that have been said about me in the past 7 years that it honestly makes me want to puke by people who don't even know me. And it's been a constant thing, so I can relate to Punk on that. However, this idea that Punk is this professional, because during the promo, he's talking about how he wants to be a professional and conduct business, but yet he goes to the back and starts swinging at the Young Bucks. So if you're the world champion, if you're the experienced talent, if you're the guy who's setting an example for the younger guys who are going to come after you, swinging at a member of management, whether they're a wrestler or not, is not the right way to go about it. I'm sorry, it's not. And granted, in the past, I myself have had outbursts, in my real life and anger issues. It's something I've dealt with. When you are the top face of a brand, the world champion, for you to go back there and swing on any wrestler, much less a member of management, shows that you have an utter lack of control. Ace Steel apparently threw a chair and hit Kenny Omega in the head. So you've got literally multiple pieces of talent. Punk, you've got the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega getting involved in a big fight. Pieces of talent that are champions, because the Young Bucks and Kenny are the AEW Trios champions. You've got Hangman Page being hung out to dry. You've got a lot of things going on. And I suspect that at some point, if this gets resolved, that perhaps they will turn it into an angle. But right now, it's not. And honestly, if I were Tony Khan, he needs to make an example out of this right now. And I think some fines have to be levied and some suspensions need to go down. Because this is AEW is a private company. Right? The Khans own it. It's private, but you still want to have a company that's at least functioning like a well-oiled machine. And when you've got your top guy fighting with your management, I think, in my opinion, everyone needs to really, really, there have to be some consequences. Because if there are no consequences here, the only thing Tony Khan is telling the locker room is that you can walk all over me, you can walk all over management, or if you're a member of management, you can go talk to Sheets. Which, again, I don't know if they really did or they didn't. That's stuff that I've heard. I can't hear the conversations that the Young Bucks have with Dave Meltzer or Sean Ross Sapp, or the ones they don't have. But either way, this is a real issue. This has been going on for quite some time now because I have heard of other civil wars going on in AEW, but this is something that I said on my podcast, me and my co-host Brandon Draven, on the KLB show, and that is that, when the company first started, we talked about how everything seemed hunky-dory at first, but we knew that in pro wrestling, every major top guy in wrestling has an ego. They all have egos, and eventually those egos clash. We see it in every wrestling company that's ever existed. AEW is no different. If you remember, they were a big family when they first started. We're going to do this together, all that stuff. Then Cody Rhodes, earlier this year, takes a hike, leaves the company. A lot of rumors about that. A lot of information about that. A lot of speculation about that. It wasn't the Elite. There were already talks of him and the Elite not getting along last year. There's that. And then there's now this thing with CM Punk and the fact that he's saying that the Elite, Kenny the Young Bucks Hangman are behaving like children, which is something that Jim Cornette has said about them in the past. It really has created a big divide. And I think that this bothers a lot of AEW fans. I've seen some fans actually go out and say they're going to boycott the company if Punk does not get suspended or if there's no action taken. Of course, fans say that bullshit all the time and they end up watching anyways. It's just how it is. But either way, no matter what those fans do, whether they mean it or they don't mean it, this is a real problem because you can't just fire Punk. Punk is your champion. You have a contract with him. He is your top guy, but he's also swinging at other wrestlers in the back as a shoot. And that's not what wrestling is. I expected better from Punk than to do something like that. Tony Khan needs to look at how he does things. He needs to look at how he, manages the company. And now, for him, it's going to be even more stressful because football season's around the corner. And he's the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, him and his dad. So there's going to be a lot more, a lot more work in TK's future. But he needs to really look at how he runs this company and needs to really self-analyze and think, okay, what am I doing wrong? What can we do better? And how can we get control of this situation? Because this is legitimately out of control. It's legit out of control. That's all I have to say. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments. And I'll probably be doing a KLB episode at some point very soon. So check that out. I'll leave a link down below to that podcast. Sign up on Apple iTunes so you can check out the show. I think you'll like it. Take care. Talk to you soon.